Hello student. Today I'm going to cover this topic Women's Movement Part 2, which is part of the course BGS 011. Uh, Let me briefly introduce to myself. I'm Dr. Smita Patil, teachers in Department of School of Gender and Development Studies. I think it's very important to understand through this lecture that, why we need to engage with the historical movements of the, in women's movement in India. And as you know that in one of the lecture I mentioned that, the women's movement has interlinkages with the South Asia, and therefore that its history and society, there are some certain common threads which one can weave and see how it goes on. Um, we also try to through this lecture try to understand and read the challenges and strength before the women's movement. So particularly that in this lecture, my effort is to interrogate the gender bias in the contemporary India and how women's movement responded to it. We will deal mainly the types and natures, the dynamics, composition, methods of functioning, political, socio-economic agendas in the women's movement. And then if the identity differences, ideological trends, critically evaluate the important debates in the women's movement. Because so therefore, the objective of this lecture is that how gender bias are challenged by the women's movement in contemporary India, the nature, dynamics, composition, method of functioning, political, socio-economic agendas. The genesis of the new women's liberation movement lay in the radicalization of the Indian politics in the late 70s. The rebellious moods of the youth, poor peasant, marginal farmers, educated Dalit tribal men, women, industrial working classes found its expression in the formation of innumerable special interest groups addressing themselves to the needs and demands of the local masses. The micropolitical process were also finding major shifts in their rhetoric as the protest movements of the subaltern masses had taken militant paths guided by different political ideologies. The official, communist parties faced major political challenges in Kerala, West Bengal, Andhra Pradesh, Bihar, and Punjab. However, the middle class mass upheavals in the Gujarat, popularly known as Navanirman movement against corruption, price rise, unemployment, speculation, hoarding, and then, if you look at 1974 onwards, replicated in Bihar in the name of Sampurna Kranti movement under the leadership of the Gandhian leader Jayaprakash Narayan. The unprecedented strike of the railway workers gave proof of the political power of the collective strength of the working class. Tribal people struggle against destructive development, which served the interest of the kulakas, moneylanders, contractors, and then the indigenous industrialists thriving on the barbaric means of the surplus extraction. Development in the Chhattisgarh, Singhbhumi, Bijapur, Chandrapur, Dhule, in the pockets of the northeastern state and so on. The tribal masses in the Dhule region of the Maharashtra demanded the employment guarantee scheme in response to the 1974 drought, which was again very significant and important to understand because the series of drought which had happened in India, and end of the day, it's a woman who's and children who suffers, and you can relate in fact this drought debate in order to understand the pandemic, the current pandemic also. So paralyzing the normal agriculture activities. This historic demand revolutionized the thinking of the development workers about the responsibility of the state at the time of the economic crisis. In Maharashtra, the women activists and women intellectuals involved in progressive movements took initiatives in forming a united front called Anti-Price Rise Women's Committee and organized a direct action against the culprits who created man-made scarcity of the essential goods. Thousands of the poor and lower middle class women joined the struggle under the leadership of the seasoned and able women from the left and socialist background. For instance, among those during that time was Mrunal Gore, Ahilya Rangnikar, Manju Gandhi, Tara Reddy, and so on, made their special remark in the eyes of the masses as a result of their unique ability to reach out to women of the different class backgrounds. Their intellectual self-sufficiency, ability to relate micro issues to macro political reality, simple lifestyle, and non-bossy nature provide the role models to the younger generation of the women's liberation activities of the all political parties. Around the same time, the Conference of Women's Liberation Movement Coordination Committee was organized in Pune. This had an even larger sociopolitical and cultural bias, as rights from young educated women, professional writers, teachers, industrial working class women, women workers from the unorganized sector, then temple prostitute, tribal women participated in the liberation and highlighted their demands. The Stri Mukti Sangatna in Bombay, progressive organization of the women in Hyderabad, were founded in 1974. In Delhi, new leadership among women evolved from the radical students movements and democratic rights movement. Individual women in a different political grouping all over the India were feeling discontent about the patriarchal biases in their organization, but they came out openly against it only after the emergency rule got over. And in fact, I would suggest you that the second wave movement in the West, where the radical feminism emerged, it was a very similar kind of, situation. And therefore, that the second wave feminism, particularly the radical feminism, emerged because it was a very similar kind of take, which one would see that the patriarchal biases in the organization were there. So these were independent, self-determining democratic movement which questioned all hierarchical structure. In India, young people of that period had not participated in the demands of the nationalist movement. Faced with the multiple crises, economic, social, political, along with the corruption, drought, inflation, unemployment, and the rural poor, disenchanted youth responded with the protest. And one would see that the action, consolidated action, development into powerful organizations throughout the country was going on. These movements raise a number of diverse issues: land rights, wages, employment, then security at workplace, water availability, destruction of nature, operational exploitation of the Dalits and the working class masses. Many women participated in this struggle with enthusiasm, responsibility, and creativity. The United Nations Declaration of 1975 as an International Women's Year coincided with the emergency rule in India. By the time the emergency was lifted in 1977, several women's groups had, demanded for democratic rights. The praise was very much there, and the action after the imposed silence of nearly 2 years, the atrocities committed against women during the emergency were openly documented and reported in the press. These atrocities struck in most women and own experiences and their life, also the family, in the streets and the workplace, and in political groups. So there were a number of documentation which were documented, and over a period of time it was revealing the truth. So the culmination of this process was reached in 1980s when many women's groups took to the street to protest. During 1980s, the issues of women's oppression was depicted not only in discussion forums, seminar, and serious articles, but also in the popular media. Women who had on their own identified sources their problems and indignity began to acquire language. Organizational platform was one of them, that a collective identity, legitimacy, where they were articulating their voices. The status of the Women's Committee appointed by the Government of India released a voluminous report in 1974, which is known as Towards Equality Report, which is one of the most important landmark in women's studies and women's movement in India. was prepared by the scholars with the interdisciplinary perspective and were presented in the Parliament of India, where it receives a tremendous response from the decision-making bodies, the state apparatus, and the print media. So, a shocking description of the Indian woman's reality, which manifested in declining sex ratio, very high rate of the female mortality, mobility, marginalization of women in the economy, discriminatory personal laws were some of the major highlights of this report. At the same time, just rural urban divide, which was also mentioned in terms of the education. Nevertheless, the report failed to throw a light on the violence against women in the civil society by the custodian of the law and order. Major achievements of the report lay in the policy decision taken by the principal research body like the Indian Council of the Social Science Research, ICSSR, to provide the financial support to the scholars committee committed to the women's cause to consider research into problems faced by the women in poverty groups. So between 1977 and 1979, new women's group emerged into cities like Delhi, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Bombay, Ahmedabad, Patna, and Madras. They organized protests against dowry murders, beauty contests, sexist portrayal of the woman in media, which today we can call it commodification of the body, pornographic films and literature imported from the abroad, then introduction of the virginity test by the UK immigrants authorities, and custodial rape and pitiable condition of the woman in the partition. So these groups were multicultural in their composition and worldwide. As a result, their political agenda reflected the contemporaneous handling of the complex reality of the woman constructed by interplay of the class, caste, region, religion, ethnicity, and globalization. So, therefore, that the spokesperson of these groups had an advantage of high levels of the ideological investment and the experience of the radical movement of the late 70s. Their collective wisdom provided the main backlog to the movement. The newsletter, magazines, and booklets in regional language as well as in English provided a creative way of handling the Indian women's problems. The need of the study of the women's issue in academia, because it's very important to understand and relate the women's movement and its link with the women's studies, the emergence of the women's studies, and therefore the need of to study the women's issues in academia institutions and conduct research based on experimental material and affirmative action was beginning to discuss among Indian women studies scholars by the early 80s. Further, the discourse on the subject proved to be fruitful exercise for activists, academicians, researchers, policy planners, and the international agencies like United Nations. The apex body of the Higher Learning University Grant Commission defined women's studies as a discipline that involved research, documentation, teaching, training, and action. It is understood that women have subordinate status in our society to the knowledge base created by the women's studies should be used for the empowerment of the woman. It was in the early 1980s, the women's studies, in fact, centers functioning autonomously and within the university system started accepting empirical and experimental evidences from the women's movement. It was a time when, participatory research, action research, subaltern studies were gaining ground in the field of the social sciences as well as among the social work institution and the non-governmental organization focusing on the special fields. This process indirectly facilitated the interaction of the women's studies and the women's movement. So, wide range of the issues concerning women were extensively discussed with the tremendous technical details in the first national conference on the perspectives for the women's liberation movement in India in December 1980. In terms of the alternative culture inputs, in fact, this conference was a trendsetter. It constituted songs, music, ballads, vocabulary, plural lifestyle, and multilingual dialogues. The conference made possible for the woman from totally divergent political movement to come together for the democratic discourse. So 4 months later, in this first national conference of the women's studies in April 1981 at the SNDT Women's University, this is one of the first university which is a women's university established by the Honorable Keshav Karve. A wide variety of the issues were discussed by activists, researchers, academicians, administration, and policymakers. These include the development process which bypass women, gender biases in textbooks, sexism in the media, gender blindness in science and technology, health needs to health of the woman and violence against women, rape, domestic violence, prostitution, and I mean it's a range of issues which was dealt there. The general consensus among the participants, both men and women, were that women's studies was pro-woman and not neutral. So it was seen that women's studies would build knowledge base for empowering women by sort of pressing for the change at the policy level in curriculum development. By criticizing gender blindness as well as the gender bias within mainstream academia by creating alternative analytical tools and the visions and the advocacy of the women's developmental need in the economy and in the society. This conference established new trends by which gradually women activists were invited as resource person and participants to academic seminars, consultation, training workshops. And I think that the women's group also played a significant role, and most of the women who took an initiative in the formation of the new women's group were extremely adverse of the authoritarian structure within the family, institutional and religious institutions, and society at large. From all of them did not allow women critical thinking and the space to grow as an independent, politically conscious human being. Hence, they were very clear in their approach that they would encourage each and every member of the group to articulate thoughts and establish intimate working relationship based on the collective decision-making process. So initially, this method proved very effective in creating a new cadre of the women who were intellectually enlightened, politically articulate, well-informed, and supportive to each other within their small group. This was become because there were no male political bosses to craft their initiatives and made them to sort of do the routine activities or of the fundraising, translating, typing, posting, cleaning, cooking of the members of their political groups was one of the issue also which they sort of grapple simultaneously. Such groups in the Madras, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Bombay, Pune, and Delhi brought out the documents, position papers, manifestos, pamphlets, and reproduced the whole lot of documents of the women's liberation movement in the other countries, and the debates which was emerging in India and the Indian situation. They had tremendous urge to reach out to the more and more like-minded women. Their meetings were, with the new ideas, powerful polemics on epistemological issues. On same time, they reflected deep concern for the immediate problem of the woman, as they believe that women's issues needed to be taken upon day-to-day bias, and patriarchal power needed to be challenged in both personal and political spheres of the life. So, therefore, it's very important to understand the political socio-economic agenda. In the nationwide anti-rape campaigning in 1980s resulted in the emergence of the proliferation of the autonomous women's organization in several cities and towns of India. These groups such as Forum Against Oppression of the Women in Mumbai, Saheli in Delhi, Stree Shakti Sangatna in Hyderabad, Vimochana in Bangalore, managed to get the tremendous publicity in the print as well as the audiovisual media, because of that time violence against women was the most sensational and the newest issue. Family members, especially father, brothers, and the women's victim of the violence flooded the women's group, and then later on the women's victims started approaching these groups on their own. While doing agitational and propaganda work against a series of the rape cases in the custodial situation, domestic violence, dowry harassment, these groups realized that the work on the sustained basis to take care of the rehabilitation aspect of the violence against women, it was important to evolve institutional structure from supporting women's victims of the violence based on the feminist principle of the solidarity and the sisterhood. The criminal legal system in India made it inevitable for these groups to establish a rapport with the police for an immediate redress for the women victims of the of violence. The condition of the woman in the remand homes and the Nari Nikitans were something which, barbarically treating. They could not be trusted for the women's rehabilitation. That's one of the, crucial issue which come up. In fact, many women who suffered at their hands approached the new women's group. The women's activists had to deal with the attitude of the victim beating, double standards of the sexual morality, sexist remarks, and then the kind of humor, the police stuff, the ways in which it was treating, the legal apparatus, the public hospitals. These were all, the ways in which it was treating. It was questionable. At the same time, the every step they encounter class, caste, communal bias. These resulted into confrontation between the women's group and establishment at that time. However, in the course of the time, they realized that it was necessary to suggest coercive alternatives for attitudinal changes in terms of the legal reforms, method, intervention, staff trainings for public education, literature. Women in convincing style was, sort of writing audiovisuals material for reaching out to more and more people was necessary. Professional bodies and educational institutions were approaching these groups for understanding the women's question. In this context, the social interest group focusing on the, on media monitoring, resource material for consciousness raising, creation of the culture, alternative publication, research and documentation, bookstalls, legal aid work come into existence during the 80s and got consolidated in 90s. These groups played a complementary roles in each other's development. And the new women's group were very important during that time. For instance, the movement acquired the momentum with the campaigning against the Supreme Court of India's judgment on Tukaram versus state of Maharashtra. But at that time, we were using as a feminist the Mathura rape case, a teenage tribal girl who was gang raped by the policeman. At the date, in the night in the police station in Chandrapur district in Maharashtra in the 1972, which was a custodial rape. So after 8 years of the legal battle by her systematic lawyers, advocate Vasudha Dagamwar, in the session court, the High Court and the Supreme Court, even though Mathura lost everything, her status, her self-esteem, her credibility, the court declared that Mathura was not raped by the men in the uniform, but Mathura, being a woman, an easy virtue, gave willful consent for the sexual intercourse. I mean, this was something which we need to, again rethink, because even though eventually this judgment was challenged. So Vasudha Dagamwar and her 3 colleagues wrote an open letter challenging the Supreme Court verdict in an extremely poignant and logically convincing style. The letter was widely publicized in the print media, and I would in fact ask you to have a look at this book, Women's Studies in India, Reader, where it's edited by Mary John. This letter is again given where you can sort of understand what was the demand of these 4 scholars. So 2 major points concerning these issues were reopening of the Mathura rape case and amendments of the rape laws that put burden of the proof of the woman had narrow definition of the rape around these demands. The women's group were formed. They collected signatures on their petitions, conducted study circle where experienced lawyers spoke, organized rallies, demonstrating in front of the offices of the concerned authorities, prepared poster, exhibition plays, and slogan against violence against women, wrote letters to the editors, different newspapers, wrote articles, and a lot of work they have done. So initially they sort of concentrated on women specific issues such as wife battery, then dowry murders, rape, if teasing, and several other issues. But from these experiences, direct action on the activists of the women's group got to understand, the relation operating within modern families, and then it was then the 3 important, again, significant contribution done during that time is the fight against unjust family laws, in which that one would see that women facing problem concerning marriage, divorce, maintenance, alimony, property rights, custody, children, guardianship rights, and the activities, related with that, the personal laws, the customary laws were discriminating against women. The Hindu daughters were deprived of the copernacy rights during that time in the paternal property and the codes of the, Mitakshara. The Christian woman could not divorce on the grounds of the husband adultery. And these were a very crucial issue which one has to understand, because again this cruelty and bestiality was there, sodomy was there, while Christian husband could just declare their wives and um, and then divorce them. So these were the important issue which were, the Parsi daughters were not to allowed in non-Parsi men, and they will lose the property rights. Even though even there are a number of cases which are there when one comes to the personal laws, the Parsi personal laws or the Sharia law subjugated to the Muslim woman by imposing parda. So you would see that again these laws which one is grappling with. So one would see that the patriarchal ideology which was governing irrespective of the religious background, the sexual morality, double standard, and the ways in which that the society was working on. And then the Supreme Court was again and again the women's group was sort of approaching to the Supreme Court. So to let me conclude this lecture, through this lecture what was I was trying to say is that how this debate of the women's group, autonomous organization worked, taken up the question, what are the linkages of the women's and women's movement and the women's studies emerged, how the legal questions were addressed during that time, and particularly the custodial rape, which we have been calling to the Tukaram versus state of Maharashtra. So these are the several number of issues, because one has to grapple, and even today we are talking about these issues, and questioning about it. So thank you.